Hi, I'm Brandon, and I'd like to welcome you to the Crucible of Thought podcast. For the last few years, I've been rethinking a lot of my spiritual and political positions, and this podcast is where I explore the various topics and their impact on the church and the nation. This is episode number 155, and today I'll be talking again with Paule Patterson. This is our sixth discussion as we work through the contents of his book, which is going to press today. We're going to be talking about this time the awakening and enlightenment, and then the very opposite, the idea of kenosis, of dying to self, of ego death. And by the way, I'd really appreciate it if you'd drop a like or subscribe on this episode. This is a small podcast, and it's more than just encouraging me. It tells the algorithm that it's worth recommending to other folks. So if this content is valuable to you and you think it would be valuable to others, then help us out with the like and subscribe buttons. So with that out of the way, settle in and enjoy this conversation with Paule. Well, hi, Paule. It's nice to talk to you.
Hey, Brandon. It's great to be back. I'm looking forward to today.
So you told me that you're sending the print off to Amazon today.
Yeah, this morning I finished. I combined two appendixes and added one more, and then I've been uh, kind of There's really nothing left to do on it. Even has pictures now, so I'm dragging my feet a little bit today. But the next thing I'll be doing after this podcast is we'll be adding it to Amazon, and it'll take a couple days, but it'll be ready this week.
That is really awesome. I'm sure you're excited about that.
Yeah. I think mostly I'm excited to be done with it. It turned into such a project, and I'm looking forward to having it off my plate. For a while, it felt burdensome, and then it felt exhilarating, and then it felt terrifying, and now that perfectionism I've been trying to work through. I'll be happy to have it done.
So the next time we talk, I look forward to asking you how you feel about what's not been happening because of that. You know, all the work that you're able to set aside and get some time
Yeah.
back. I'm sure that's going to be interesting.
Yeah. I was reflecting today about that artistic, creative tendency to start a new project before you finish one. And I've been feeling that. I've been really feeling that. And today, I think I was going through a little bit of mourning of like actually finishing something and having to be okay with it going out. And it was, felt, I don't know, felt grown up almost, but yeah, it felt sad.
Yes, I can identify with that. It's the sense of, well, I mean, there's two conflicting things going on. One is I'm having fun with this. I don't want to stop. And the other is, but I really want to do the next thing that's interesting me. And if I don't finish this now, I know I'm never going to. So,
right. Yeah. And I already know what the next book is that I want to start writing in my morning kind of practice. It's going to be, I think, an attempt at fiction retelling a sequel to Thus Spoke Zarathustra, which is Nietzsche's
yes.
We Killed God. And I'm going to basically try to tell my version of that through this book, but a fictional version.
That'll be interesting to read.
Yeah, it'll be fun to write. We'll see. We'll see if it's actually interesting to read when it's done.
Time is in the proof is in the pudding, as they say. So
that's cool. Yeah.
Well, so let's kick it off. And today I want to talk about. I want to start off with the Enlightenment, and I think more than just the Enlightenment, what it did to the Christian faith. So you brought up this verse, "Awake, O sleeper, and arise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you," as Ephesians 5:14, and the impact that has on our thinking. So obviously the title of your book speaks of a mystic awakening, and I think we often compare awakening to enlightenment. And you spend some time talking about the historical enlightenment in the 18th century, but that it's a double-edged sword. It brought reason and science, but also a loss of mystery and then the perceived effects, I guess, of that on religion. So why don't you talk to that for a moment?
Sure, yeah. If we put it in context, we have the Dark Ages, and in my book, I like to I in some sense try to generalize that into one millennia of time.
Hmm.
But if we just summarize that and kind of move on, after the Dark Ages, when the control of the church broke, part of what broke was the democratization of information. Education was more available; people could read, but along those lines, you also had all these Greek manuscripts, and not just Greek, but these foreign manuscripts coming out of Arabia as well that were flooding in to Western society and exposing people to all these ideas they haven't been exposed to. So on one side, you have this huge influx of new information, and this is where the enlightenment idea comes from. It's this idea that we were in the dark ages, and now all these secrets, all these truths that were hidden from us are finally accessible, and we don't have to live underneath this dominion, this darkness. And so that's kind of where this, I think, this idea of enlightenment, why it was called that. And it gave people a lot of great things. It gave us sciences. It gave us logic and reason. The reason that we're able to talk through devices today is because of technology and the sciences that were birthed and rebirthed out of that. However, we also one of the things we lost is we lost. And Nietzsche called this out is we lost the mystery. We lost the soul of a human. We became so materialistic and so logical that if we couldn't see that 1 + 1 = 2, we couldn't really work with it or believe it. We still today see how we struggle with this in our workplace. If we don't feel like our work has meaning, we understand that we live in this bifurcation of having to do something we kind of don't want to do in order to live. And it's kind of this master slave duality. And this is a lot of times what people refer to today about being in the matrix or having taken the
Hmm.
red pill. But back in the Enlightenment, so they broke from the church, and I think in some sense they started running from God. If you couldn't prove it on paper, if you couldn't put it in a test tube, then it wasn't real, then it wasn't factual. And we started reducing things down to their most common ingredients and their most common fundamental aspects, and trying to explain the relationships of those common aspects in the most basic, simplest terms. But that's just not how reality works. And we know that. You know, to this day, science is trying to pull apart reality and see what lies behind it. And one of the things we've hinted at before on this podcast is how in the Western world, we're back to the beginning of debating, is there a God and what is consciousness? Um, so we got a lot of cool things out of the Enlightenment, but we also, I think, became insulated shells, these objects that were materialistic based, um, and we thought, you know, I can catch it sometimes just in the way we talk of how we refer to ourselves as if we are a cause and effect relationship, as if we have no part in that. But that's part of what we lost in the Enlightenment is the soul, the idea of actual human freedom and human spirit. That there is things like love. Um,
Hmm.
if I may, too, like this is something I bring up in the book is the fact how love is not taken seriously, both within Christian doctrine. Look up in your systematic theologies where the chapter is on agapology. You know, where's the doctrines and the core theses on agape love and the logical conclusions that if we were to follow Scripture, that these would lead us to. And you'll notice that there's a big gaping absence of it in Western theology. And we did that with other things. And so we've explored how we've done this with mysticism, and how, in some sense, like the modern religious experience is a manufactured, forced mystical experience, um, where we took it out of ourselves and put it out there, rather than letting God still reside within.
Okay. So one of the quotes in your book is that theology was either reshaped to align with scientific modernity or dismissed as irrelevant. In response, Christianity polarized. Both approaches reduced Christianity to a function of the ego. Is
Mhm.
that sounds like what you're talking about now? This idea
Yeah,
of it all being an internalized thing that has to be brain based as opposed to soul or heart based.
100%. I remember hearing that reason is an enemy of faith when I was, uh,
Hmm.
think when I was in Bible college. I don't really hear it around anymore, but I remember hearing a professor at Boise State University who left the faith because he started asking too many questions. Um, and this is kind of what we do: is we it doesn't matter if you're the uber spiritualist or really fundamental, or if you're the atheist scientist, or even kind of in the progressive Christian camp. We end up drawing a line between the spiritual and the sciences. We sometimes go into the camp of highly individualism, or we go into the inverse camp that's still individualistic, but it's that right, rugged individualism, and you have to prove yourself, and if you have problems, it's because you're lazy. We still fall into this dualistic either or mindset, and it's still ego based.
Hmm. Remind us of how you're using the term ego because we talked about that
Oh,
last time, but I think it would help to reset
yeah,
that word for the context today because we're going to be talking about ego a lot later.
I appreciate that. In the book, I generally lump ego and shadow together.
Mhm.
um, and I try to differentiate between ego and persona, partly because persona is a healthy thing. We put hats on, we have to embody modes and roles in life. We all understand that, but a persona is different than an ego. And what an ego is a false image of yourself. It's an idea of ourselves that we try to protect or hold on to. And this could be a future idea, it could be a past idea. This is where like shame and insecurity
Mm.
grudges up and holds on to us. It's where our fear and our passions, my struggle with addiction has come from. It's all these things, these I's and these me's that are in me that are tugging and trying to get control of the narrative of the story, or trying to have their feel or get their fix. And so we have all these me's. I think it was in section 5 that we went through 6 different parts of the brain that all talk together. And like,
Right.
our, when we refer to I, it's not so simplistic. So when I say ego, I am using these 3 letters to try to generalize a much bigger thing going on with us.
Gotcha.
I'm trying to capture that dualism that splits us, that those divides and fractures that ultimately lead us to not having peace, not feeling love and joy, not being able to authentically live and be content with things as they are. Is ego is the mask, and like the shadows, whatever is behind it. It's the things that we are hiding and running from. Does that make
S-
sense?
Yes. So, how does ego, in some sense, the idea of enlightenment and ego seem to clash a little bit then? In
I would
this,
like to hear why you think that before I respond.
I guess because if the enlightenment is all about let's bring rationality and intellectualism into the picture,
Mm, yeah.
whereas the ego is all about um, you I forget exactly the word you used, but the idea of a false picture that we tell ourselves about ourselves, and
Hmm.
so enlightenment kind of pushes against ego. It sounds like.
Yeah, I would consider the Enlightenment from the 1600s on almost like a faux Enlightenment. It
Okay.
wasn't quite. It wasn't quite all the way there. We needed the rationale, we needed the reason, and we needed the logic, because those were real things. They work. Look at us. We're doing crazy things that people 100 years ago never imagined. Um, so it was an enlightenment in that sense. It exposed us to an entire new world that we didn't even think was real, that we weren't allowed access to, that was restrained from us, from the powers and the systems that be. So we went through an enlightenment there, but yeah, we fell back into rationalism and pure logic. But we are
Okay.
not pure ration and logic. That's like one side of our brain that tends to think that way. And even then, it's not a computer. We don't fully understand how this thing's work. This thing works. It's not ones and zeros. There's a lot more going on. And even Kant, way after near the end of the Enlightenment, he had a whole critique of reason. Why reason itself can't get us all the way to full understanding of what this reality is all about.
Mm-hmm.
I suggest Kant was a little wrong. He suggests there's a gap that humans can't fully know reality. And I think what he means by know, I think he means that logic and that rationale, that reason. I think, though, we can know it, but on that right side, that mystical side and the experience, we may not be able to put
It's a different
words to
word.
it.
It's a different word meaning of know.
Yeah.
K-N-O-W.
Yep.
Okay.
So yeah, the Enlightenment, ego death clashes with modern Western Enlightenment. However, originally the original Enlightenment didn't happen in the 16 or 1500s. It happened before, with Greece and
Yeah.
all the literature and all that stuff. That's really what people were referring to when they called the 1600s the Enlightenment. Is they were really just stealing that name from back then.
Okay.
And these people, they went through spiritual things, and they had their own practices and their own systems that they engaged with.
Sure.
You read a lot of Plato's things, and he talks about the allegory of the cave, how humans tend to live in a shell. He doesn't say shell, but we live in this cave, and we just look at the reflections and we react to those, thinking those are real. And he talks about ascending out of the cave and realizing there's so much more to reality and trying to explain it to the people back in the cave.
Yeah.
It's the same thing we're talking about, this Kant's gap, the upper story, lower story, the dualism, that the only thing that works in this world is reason and logic or dictated truth from above.
So let me ask you a question. Watching what's going on today,
Mhm.
I think a lot of people postulate that history is cyclical, right? Are we
Mhm.
sliding back in some sense into a pre-enlightenment way of thinking among certain subcultures, at least in our nation and probably others around the world,
Pre-enlightenment.
in the sense of
Yeah.
falling back on um, deliberately choosing against reason, choosing against rationale because leaders or parties or um, various social constructs tend to want to become isolated and insular and say we have the truth regardless of all the data that exists. It
Yeah.
feels like we're stepping back out of enlightenment in those cases.
Yeah, we are. Um, However, I would suggest simultaneously we are on the precipice of a new renaissance, of a new enlightenment. The book even suggests that a new awakening is coming, because
Sure.
while all these fractures that are happening, this nihilism that you just described, this loss of meaning and loss of trust, because right, like, who do you trust anymore? Who do you go to for answers?
Mhm.
Who can you actually rely on? And a lot of people, even the people that have the answers, they know. Um, they know what we're talking about. That there's this void, this existential assumption that we have to perfectly figure this out, but there's no way we can, and we have to be able to get through that. So, on one side, we're reacting against it, and it's going to a lot of the noise, a lot of the chaos that we're feeling now. I think will continue to perpetuate and go through this cycle. However, I also think that the cycle you're referring to is going to keep pushing us up and through. It's the teleological attractor we talk about, the coming of the Son of Man. The the apocalypse that's happening right now is an unveiling.
Mhm.
It's I think, neurological in many ways, but I think it's always neurological. Every human that's had an apocalypse or has had an ego death that's led to an awakening, a spiritual rebirth, they understand a lot of these things. They know what it's like to be down in the cave in the allegory, and then to come out and to realize there's so much more to life and reality, and then to try to come back into society and to feel like people don't quite get it. Um, and so I think a lot of the tension going on right now is a lot of psychological reaction. A lot of people live from one reaction to another, from one experience to another, and they live in autopilot. And there's so much distrust and so much um, noise that we're just they're just going to keep going through that, and the
Yeah.
escalation will increase. Uh, but at the same time, more people are going to wake up. It's more pain.
Yeah.
It's more responsibility and consequences and uncertainty. So
So
the harvest is right.
one thing that's shows up in scripture a number of times is the idea of birth pangs.
Hmm.
And I mean, we can talk about awakening. We could probably also use the term birthing to talk about the same
Yeah,
characteristics, the same things that are happening. And so the birthing of the Christ, um, comes with birth pangs, comes with,
yeah,
and that's an interesting phenomenon because it involves a contraction and a pushing and pain, and then a retreat and a time of peace and rest, and then the next one
yeah,
comes which is a little stronger, and the next one comes which is a little stronger, and you don't get to a birth without going through that cyclical experience. So I think that kind of describes, I think, maybe the cycles that we're talking about, and what you see at the end of that, of course, is that revealing, that awakening, that birthing of something, you know Christological, really.
100%. I was getting some goosebumps listening to you when I think back to a year and a half ago, where I, with a huge chip on my shoulder, doing research at an evangelical church, and then finally figuring out how they were messing it all up, and God smacking me, telling me to do it right, and you're going, all right, Jesus, let's do it. Uh, I went through infantile contractions, world collapses. Uh, my world felt small and huge all at the same time. It was confusing. It messed me up, man. It was rebirth. And yeah, awakening is rebirth. It's 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 to die and to come out again.
Yeah.
Some of the Christian mystics later on would talk about, if you die before you die, you'll never die.
Mhm.
And and I kind of, I don't know 100% what that means, but I know what it means.
One of the
Um,
problems I think we have, certainly in religious circles, is that we try and be reductionist about a particular phraseology or language or something, and say that that's the only thing it can mean, instead of recognizing that there's a lot of different ways of capturing an idea that are each one is only partial due to the
mm,
limitations of language and of our brains and so forth. But when you look at the giant picture and you start seeing all these different motifs showing up, then maybe there's something in each one of them that is instructive. No, not one of them is really complete. And speaking of that, I think this is an interesting place to segue into the next idea that I wanted to look at for a moment, which is, it's a lot of people observe the same thing about different faiths. The idea that Christianity is, it's our home faith. It's where we
mhm,
grew up. And it certainly
yeah,
has a very particular hold on God, whatever that divinity is. But a lot of more progressive thinkers would say, well, it's not the only understanding. You look at the Native American experience, and they understand something that is very similar but unique, and probably
mhm,
both of them have value. And so there's this idea that across different faith traditions, this experience that we're having of trying to understand God and draw closer to that divine thing, is carried in different ways by different groups. And I think you talk about that some in your book, from things like indigenous wisdom, Buddhist practice, and this idea that
Yeah.
this awakening is more global in a lot of ways than probably we Christians would like to believe. So, what do you think about that?
100%. I think a lot of times religion becomes a one of the healthy motives that's there. It's not the only thing, and it can get wrong quickly. Is this motive to protect people from doubt and struggles, because
Hmm.
it's, to question God's existence and whether or not what happens after death is not an easy thing to go through. Um, it's a psychological process to go through.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of times religion, like there was some wisdom in trying to help people not get too exposed, and I think some of that was there. But I think over time, it between doctrinal entropy, between the cycles that civilizations go through and the isolation we fall into, uh, we get trapped. And before we know it, we have no idea what's going on. So our faith then, um, if I was a pastor, the way I would say this is I would encourage people to listen to what their faith teaches them. Because when we look at the scriptures, we find back in Genesis that God was working with Melchizedek.
Yeah.
When we read in Acts 17, Paul is able to quote from their own philosophers and point to the stone of the God of the unknown God. And he's able to tell them that they are heirs of God, which is that was 2,000 years ago. I think we could say that much more so to everyone today, that they are all heirs of God.
Hmm.
And so when Jesus arrives on the scene, and he arrives within his own tradition, his own new sphere, one of the worlds that we talked about, section one, and from
Sphere.
yeah, an O sphere,
Yeah.
and it's from within this world that he is born, and he arrives. He looks around, and he is going to engage with the people of his day. What I have found is when I was first a Christian, first kind of, it was around ninth grade when I really got serious about it, is I thought Israel was this phonograph little country, and it was reduced to this really easy idea, Jewish people. And that was it. And my theology basically took off from that point, and that was all my understanding around ninth grade on.
Hmm.
But if we really go back into Jesus's context, what we notice is that Israel was a melting pot of cultures. It was shifting back and forth well before Moses and Abraham even showed up on the scene. There were synchronisms that were happening and trading of ideas, and it was one of the crossroads of the world. Before the time of Jesus, we have examples of Greek writing in Babylon around 600 BC to 30 AD. So we know Greek ideas were going back and forth from Greece to Babylon. We know Alexander the Great, for about 700 years before Christ, came through that area all the way to India, and then brought Indian and Egyptian ideas up and through. Like there was a plurality of ideas. I think Jesus studied Plato, and I think he was exposed to Buddhist ideas. I think he saw the unnamed God, and I think he experienced the unnamed God, and he himself was birthed and awakened through it. And when so yeah, he in his time he did the same thing that we're talking about now, and 2,000 years later. He challenged their tribes and their labels. He challenged their boundaries and their borders and their things and their Jewish thing and their Greco-Roman thing. And he blew it up and said, no, there are no borders. There is no Greek or Jew. There's no male or female, no master or slave. That this is not how the kingdom of God works. We are all children of God. We don't need any kings over us or judges.
So, a Christian exceptionalist, of which there are certainly plenty, would look at the sense of we're the best, we're the right
Mhm.
faith. Would look at the history you just gave and say, well, God chose this melting pot location, kind of at the nexus of cultures
Hmm.
to into which to drop the capital T truth that supersedes all of those other ones. Um, that certainly was the dogmatic position I was raised in, that we're
Hmm.
right because God showed up and did this thing in that context and said, okay, all you other faiths are wrong. What do we
Hmm.
do though when we see that there how do we get away from that exceptionalism graciously yet still hold on to the things that we really feel are really more broad and more um, universalist? And I have to
Yeah.
use that term because otherwise I'm, just dancing around it. But how can you be somewhat universalist without losing that thing that we feel speaks to us because we're raised in it? It's native to us, but
Yeah.
we have a sense of a tug on our heart that there's something much bigger than that. This piece of divinity that we're looking at as ours.
I think. Well, that's not what our faith is. Our faith is in Christ and Him alone. It's in a Jewish rabbi who said, "If any man would come after me, pick up his cross and die to self." From the earliest writings in Galatians and First Corinthians that we can date around 50 AD, we see Paul the Apostle emphasizing this same idea of dying to self. And that was what the faith was. So that was a crucial tenet of the faith back then. And it's how they were able to have Greeks and Jews together, and men and women together, and masters and slaves together. It's how they were able to have a group of people together that had no right being together, and they were able to make it work. And that's what I feel like that's what the church should be described as today. That's what the mystery should be like. Is these people have issues. They're all weird. They're all different. They're black. They're white. They're yellow. They're in between. They disagree on politics, or they have really unique views, and they're different occupations, and half of them are poor. And you know, um, it should be such a weird, eclectic group that people ask the question, "What unites these people?" And it's not. But I think it was back then. At least that was what they were going for. It's just really easy to fall back into that tribal mindset that us first them, this is our
Yeah.
home. We like to settle. This is the the temptation of Cain. We like to settle and I mean I like my abode. I like my pad. I like it. And I don't want people to mess with it. And it applies to even things like my book. I don't want people messing with my book, or I can think about my kids or my dog, or, like we like our things. Part of our faith, however, is that we go through the process of ego death, and that we learn to trust in God, and what it means to be in this one-to-one relationship with Him, where we are partners with Him and stewards. And it's I think your question highlights more pointedly part of the problem of the Christian faith in 2025 is that
Yes.
we've in some sense lost our faith.
Perhaps I think a traditional evangelical would listen to what I asked and say, well, no, the problem is that you're asking the question because you've lost your faith,
Yeah.
because they want that exceptional. And I know for me, uh, looking back on my history, and I think this is generally true, that it's a self defense mechanism to be exceptionalist because we want to
Mhm.
know, we want some certainty that we're going to heaven or whatever our reward structure looks like in the
Yeah.
faith.
We're,
And
we're
so,
always trying to prove to ourselves that we're saved.
right. And so the only way we can do that is build higher and higher walls around this is what it means to be correct in my dogma.
Yeah.
And
But it's just another Tower of Babel.
I
It's making
fully
a name
agree.
for ourselves again. We don't need to go up to meet God. We need to go down.
And the challenge, I suppose, is how we relate to people who still live in that non
Yeah.
universalist, exceptional, Christian exceptionalist world
Uh huh.
and, reject any conversation like I'm having with you right now as heretical because I'm willing to acknowledge that there's capital T truth outside of Christianity.
Hmm.
And so
The
at some level, I feel like we end up in a situation where we have to defend um, non-universalism at the same
Mhm.
time as we want to open our minds up to a bigger truth than we were taught.
Yeah.
And that tension is very difficult until you've done a lot of deconstructing.
It, the mystic in me wants to do let's do a left right thing here. So
Okay.
my little left hook is exceptionalism is not far from the same idea of American uh, nationalism and empire.
Mhm.
It's we've danced on it. We've already touched on it, but God does offer something here. There are promises of Scripture about how He will be our God and we will be His people. That we will have a name that no one else knows, or that we'll know His name that no one else knows. Like we can have our faith. We can even have our community's faith in my family. We can have that, but it's from that one set perspective, not this top down hierarchical where everything has to fit within clear black and white boundaries so everyone can feel safe.
Mhm.
Um, we can have everything that you were just describing, and it's better, it's more, it it's crazier. And it's without words.
I guess my conclusion lately has been that those who live in the exceptionalist faith have a relationship with God that is perfectly acceptable to God. I have no doubt about that. But there's room for beyond, for mystical relationships with God that are also perfectly acceptable to God, um, that don't take away from those other exceptionalist ones. I think there's room for both in this much bigger than we can imagine thing called God. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not to our credit to insist that we have the only piece that is correct, but we
Yeah.
can allow someone to live in that certainty that they have and be comfortable with them still having a right relationship with divinity themselves.
Yeah. My left brain tendency that I've been working on dismantling still struggles with this. Like I want to engage with people's ideas, and if they think something wrong, that just sounds like candy to me. Like I want to go have fun with that and have a fun argument or debate or psychoanalyze it. I don't know. I've been learning how to be okay with people as they are, to let them be as they are, and to and what I've been finding is that my fixation on this, my preoccupation or tendency to focus more and to see these things more is still a distraction. It's
Hmm.
still me. It's an egoic thing, and there's something that I'm hiding from. And um, and this one thing is not that so easily reduced. Like I can think of different stages of my life where this has come up and been either really singular or where it's been beneficial or it just came up in different contexts and different relationships. Um,
Hmm.
but the go ahead.
So this transition's an interesting thing, and what you're saying is that there is some need, I think, for community involvement in these kinds of things, where what we've been talking about so far has been somewhat my personal faith,
Yeah.
but you're talking about other people, and what we're talking about when we're talking about this universalistic sense of truth is that there's the only way we get to what I would call the capital T truth is when we bring other perspectives in, when we set aside our own egos and we see these things in the context of all of humanity. And I think
Hmm.
that's I think we talked about this a little bit last time, that the true expression of Christ is only true when it is global, all people, all cultures, all nations, all languages brought
Hmm.
together before the throne, whatever that throne
Yeah.
looks like. And it probably won't be a very Christian looking throne ultimately. It's going to be much bigger than that. And
Yeah.
so,
Well, which version of Christian do you mean, by the way?
sure,
Greek
absolutely.
Orthodox, the
Yes.
Synoptics,
Yes,
not the.
absolutely. And so I think you talk about the community aspects of these things in your
Mhm.
book a little bit. Do you have any
Yeah.
thoughts about that?
Yeah. Yeah. Mhm. Sin is never a private affair. It's always relational. It's one of the reasons why confession matters so much in relationships and why spiritual transformation discipleship is a relational phenomenon. When we are engaging with Christ and when we are engaging with the divine, if it doesn't transcend our relationships and it doesn't ultimately come out and bear fruit, then it's performance. It's more
Hmm.
ego, and it's going to even that will bear fruit. It will bear the same kind of fruit that it's been bearing since humanity has been around. So the aspect community becomes fundamental because as a human, I have to bear fruit. As a recovering addict, there are amends, there are things that I have to fix, there are things I have to catch up on. As a human in daily life, I make mistakes and my anger gets the best of me, or I get lazy and forget something. Like I, I have to be constantly going through these processes. Um,
And so that issue of that repentance is certainly then for what impact it's had on others.
yeah, I got a little distracted thinking about um, some of my like catch up work. The community matters because we have to have people to confess to and someone who can understand that confession, that they can do something with it. And this is even part of the, I think, some of the awkward process of some of the awkward conversation that we can have here about being in a community or being in part of the awakened or Christ mindset people and trying to engage with people who don't quite have that. And it's some of the awkward tension we can feel there. It's the same awkward tension, though, that we can feel in our day to day life when we are already in a healthy, right way of living, and then we engage with someone who isn't in a healthy, right
Mhm.
way of living. We understand this tension and how to do it, so it's possible. The aspect of the community, um, so first off, becomes essential because I have to bear fruit, and that fruit has to go. It has to connect to life. I'm an interconnected being. I'm a human that comes from other humans and makes other humans, and I engage and interact and serve and get my income from other humans. My legacy, my memory will be in the world of other humans. I can't get away from this fact. And the most healthy aspects when we talk about healthy living always comes down to things like acceptance and vulnerability. Am I able to be mature and can I accept my own responsibility? These are relational aspects. They require that I'm out in the world and engaging with real humans. So community. So I have to bear fruit and actually connect with other people. My relationship with Jesus can't be just a personal thing, a private thing. It has to impact how I live. It has to bear fruit and show. But the other important thing is the outside influence when other people are on the same path, when they do understand, and when we get each other's spirituality, these people they become like yokes, that become like paracletes and holy spirits that walk beside us and call out truth and call out the sin, the areas that we're falling in. Community becomes the people that they are the image bearers that we can mimic. They are the images of the divine that we can also follow when we don't have it within us. They are the people that can hold on to us when we're not able to hold on. If we don't have community, we are nothing but we're part of the body that's just cut off and left to the side. We will rot. We will die.
So let's tie this into awakening then.
Mm.
What would you say? It's a global awakening. It's like we already mentioned. It's the birthing of the body of Christ as a whole.
Hmm.
Is this process of becoming more aware of community and our responsibility to the community part of that awakening inherently?
Yeah. 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 When you study Buddhism, one of the things that's interesting, it doesn't really kind of matter what tradition you follow. You'll find that when a person, a bodhisattva, becomes a Buddha, the word Buddha means to arrive. They and I think this makes me think of the logos and the consciousness coming into the world. But the one of the few things that they all have in common is that there will be this call that they have to go help people to also awaken. That they will. That's one of the fruits to look for when someone wakes up. And you see the same call also exists within Christianity.
Sure.
That when we die to ourselves, that we will go and make disciples. That we will want to bring life to death, and we will want to help people who are asleep wake up. And these are all terms, if we listen to our music today, that we use in our music. We talk about being asleep, being dead, or being
Hmm.
cut off, or being stuck in our heads. Like we get all of this now. So in the global sense, it's people, yeah, waking up to community, but it's small things too. It's parents with kids, it's spouses, it's broken relationships, it's our neighbors. Uh, it's much more than just a congregation.
And you know what this brings to mind is that the Christianese term of discipleship um,
Hmm.
far too often gets kind of misunderstood as simply being a matter of Bible studying, Wednesday nights, as opposed to the idea of it is inherently community. It is
Yeah.
being in a really intimate relationship with someone. And so when you talk about the idea of the Buddha wanting having this focus, just like a Christian has this focus to go and make disciples of all men. It's not
Hmm.
just about, let's go have Bible studies with all men. It's about let's bring people into tight knit communities where relationship flows and where maturity results.
I might say it is about that, but it's only about that because that's the fruit it produces.
Okay.
It starts always with human consciousness and hearts, but it has to connect, right? Like this is where the synergy of the body starts coming in, where you have two people now in alignment that they can start doing things together. Um, so I think it's one, we do want to authentically help individuals. We want to help the individual human soul. The glory of God is man fully alive. And that's what we want to see, whether it's the homeless person on the side of the street or whether it's the billionaire who's comfortable in his house. They're all children of God and they all
Hmm.
have the divine within them. To do that, though, yes, community. Um, Everything we've been talking about and everything I've talked about in my book are like these lines and fractures that have fractured our community and have fractured our relationships. Even our relationships with our kids can be extended by hundreds of miles and through digital extensions of ourselves. And we don't quite have community anymore. Men are going through an epidemic of friendlessness and loneliness is driving everyone wild. But we all get this. So of course, one of the calls of an awakened Christian would be to not just help the individual, but to help create that community.
Hmm.
And the way we do that is by us being it. Um, and yeah, so this is where discipleship comes in. Discipleship is about changing our being, not about education, and it's not about winning converts.
Yes.
It's about inviting people into the way, that path that we follow,
Come walk
whatever.
with me.
Yeah. And I will
I
walk
mean,
with
isn't
you
that exactly what Jesus did? He didn't say, "Come
100%.
study me." He said, come with me."
Yeah. Yeah. And like, yeah, you know what? Right. And I'm excited about discipleship and that becoming a real topic in the American church world, because that was a topic 20 years ago. I was aware from the people I was working with that was not just out of date, but necessary. But even then, I was aware that discipleship, the conversation around discipleship then was still missing this aspect of being, of mission, of both the atonement and the eschatology of what we're still just teaching people. We're still basically just training them to go evangelize. This isn't what discipleship is. So discipleship is about changing our being, and the only way we can fully change our being is by letting our being be in relationship.
Yeah.
And um, plus, I don't know, like there's this other part of me that why it feels like we're trying to convince and prove this, but why don't we want this? This just sounds good. This just sounds healthy. This just sounds fun.
because it because we inherently know that it requires change. And like you said, you like your pad, you like your stuff. You don't want
Yeah.
to be challenged to give some aspect of that up. And there's this thing in the back of our brain that says, "But I'm going to have to die." I mean, this is a great place to tie in then to ego death and to
Yeah.
kenosis and so forth. Of if I'm going to enter into that, then it's going to require something of me. It's going to require me to be less independent, to be less
Mm.
self-directed, to be less um, unique. I might need to lay those things down and be less focused on my view of what I want to be.
Yeah.
So let's talk ego death for a few minutes then.
I would love to just point out all the I's you had in your question. I want, I
Yes, yes, yes.
change. And we are the thing that gets to change. We are the thing that gets to decide what changes. We can decide to lay things down or take it back up, but we are not those things.
Hmm.
And so this is what ego death does for us is it breaks this for us. It shows us that there's another way of approaching these things, that I can be in relationship with an object and it not be mine. I'm not good at that yet. I'm working on it, but it's helped me a lot from recovery to trying to get over, like, learn new habits of having this one-to-one posture towards things, where my identity and value isn't found in that or in the performance therein. It's found in the natural benefit and the authentic process of actually going through the experience and becoming and getting the fruit from it. Um, I have found that even trying to teach this to business people, to entrepreneurs, is an upside down way of thinking to them, but they start to get it. That we often think of who we want to be out in the future, or we want our business to be like this out here in 10 years. And then we go back here to our future and we try to predetermine everything
Hmm.
in advance. And it doesn't work out well. And then we get frustrated by step 3 because we're already off course. If, however, we do the same kind of thing, but we're always in that center set, always present, always accepting reality in the here and the now, and we're content with things, and we don't have this fixation with what is mine and building a name for ourselves, we can walk through reality a lot easier and a lot more fluid. And
I
but
guess in some sense, the only thing that matters then is that pull towards the center, whatever the goal is, and our our performance, our mistakes, our good things become less relevant. Then are we trending towards the thing that we've chosen?
yeah, it, they become less relevant, and they should fall away a little bit. The questions of whether this is good and true, is this helpful or not, does this serve, um, those become different questions. Even the questions of fun and creativity. But the thing with creativity is that to create anything, we must destroy something.
Hmm.
Whether it's the paper that I write on and the ink that it comes from, whether it's the ideas that I chewed up and spit back out, or whether it's, yeah, like, the birth of a life uh, comes from somewhere, and that life will die. And in the absence of that life, new life will grow. This is how reality works, is through this constant creation and destruction process. And we can't get out of it. We are creation. We are part of nature. But we like to think we are God. We like to think that we are eternal and that we are immortal and that we can control the frame from which we see everything. And that's just not how it works. Ego death, um, what I have found is that ego death is, for some people, they don't need it as much because they're already humble. And
Okay.
I uh, I kind of resent them a little bit. But the other thing too, even those humble people, the people that have that inner characteristic, a former church elder friend of mine, I think of, they themselves still have to go through ego death. They have to go through processes of challenging themselves, doing what they don't want to do, loving their spouses, you know, waking up early to be with the kids or something. Like these are examples of ego death. If a Christian were to really stick with their faith and really hone in on what Christ calls them to do, we'll notice that topics of love and forgiveness come up over and over again in service.
Mhm.
And these three actions, these three things in and of themselves, create and foster ego death. They create the mindsets and put us in the postures to learn these things, as well as discipleship. But the things we can learn in discipleship, like the spiritual disciplines, meditation. Meditation is a Christian practice that I it's just now getting back into churches, but we find it within Scripture. Meditation is one of those things that can diminish ego death, that can elicit ego death. Um, those big moments in life where a 2x4 hits us across the face and we finally wake up.
Yeah.
If we lean into those moments and go in, those can elicit ego death. Confession elicits ego death. And then to bring it back to your point, all of this, everything I just talked about, can only happen in community. It can only happen in relationship.
Yeah. And a lot of what you're saying, if you take the word ego out
Mm-hmm.
of what you're saying, I think it maps pretty directly onto a lot of Bible verses about dying.
Yeah.
Um, you know,
They didn't have the
a
word
seed falls
ego.
into the ground and dies, and but I think maybe there's a subtle difference between the two. I mean, has the church kind of
Yeah. There's a difference between ego and self.
yeah,
Um,
the
I
the
have
true
another.
the true truth of who you are versus the false vision of who you think you are and who you want to be.
Yeah, because your ego can change from any moment to another. We can embody it, we can put it away, we can break it, we can grow it, we can diminish it. I don't want to be that. I'm not that. There is a self, there is an I. And this is what God's deep call to be holy as he is holy, to be like the great I am without any other words after that. I am not Paul. I just am. Paul's a name that was given to me, and I appreciate it, and I embody it, and I take it, and it's useful, and I love it. It's me, but it's not me. I am. And learning to uh, developing systems, developing communities and practices, and the practices in our own lives, so we can learn to have this kind of mindset posture is what we need, not just our own personal spiritual practices for, but what we need church for as well.
One thing that occurred to me as you were speaking is that, um, you know, as Christians, I guess we're really taught to surrender completely, right? But
Mhm.
I think, and maybe this is an evangelical thing, maybe it's broader than that, but I think we're also kind of taught to try and be who God made us to be. And so, in some sense, I think maybe the church has this it's almost prideful way of looking at. I'll use the word ego here to describe, well, I think this is who God made me to be, and so I need to become that instead of truly surrendering and even
Yeah.
giving up that sense of self. Because I think we have this picture that we're given by the church often about here's what a good Christian looks like, and here's what your particular spiritual gifts are, and this is what God made you to be. And then we start chasing after that thing, and that becomes as much of an idol as anything else in our life.
hmm Yeah. And that can become performance. That can become vicarious. It can be. I have a little bit of experience of this. I was a pastor who loved living vicariously through the experiences of others. Like I get that. The the God made me this way. I call that the God card. At least I used to when I was still preaching. It's when people, God told me, or God said this, or I really feel God, or God. I had the sense of, God gave me a peace about it. Is another way we kind of show. this shows up. And I think, A, we need to be really careful with that because that's bordering on blasphemy. And it could be also bordering on blasphemy of the Holy Spirit in the sense that we are literally taking God's voice away and not allowing him to interact with us when we do that. And like we need to be careful when we do that. But the other thing too that this was making me think of was, yeah, of course this is ego. Of course this is more of the same thing that we can all understand now in 2025. But the other thing too is when people do that, when people are pointing out and they're trying to like show everyone else, they're acknowledging within themselves their own desire. They are showing the fruit of their own existential dread and their own existential uncertainty. They have to live in such a way to do that, to keep driving like that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
I'm not sure if what I'm putting
No,
down is being able to be picked up.
it is. And I would say that in my own journey of deconstructing and reconstructing my faith over the last 5 years, I have gone through an awful lot of having to lay those things down and
Mm,
to back to the concept of mystery, just be comfortable with being
mhm.
and a lot less determined to be a thing.
Yeah, yeah.
It
This might
goes
be an
against
interesting.
almost everything that I was taught as a young Christian, to
Uh huh.
just settle and to sit and to exist in the presence of God without my expectations corrupting whatever's going on.
Man, I first learned that lesson my second rehab. That was radical acceptance, and I learned it in my second rehab, and it finally stuck. Jocko Williams and a few other things that I read, and the fact I was in my second rehab, it finally started to sit. And I remember thinking at I was like 34 then, why it took me 36 years to finally learn what acceptance meant.
Hmm.
Um, And the other thing that I was thinking about as you were talking about with being was when I was a middle school youth pastor in Boise, Idaho, I wrote all my own curriculum. I was taking some classes at Boise State too, and I would use psychology stuff. But one of the things I taught middle schoolers was 4 different arguments for God's existence. And I showed them the theological, the moral, and a couple other ones. But one I left off that I didn't teach them was the ontological argument for God's existence. Partly 20 years ago, I didn't understand it. I had no idea what that meant. The ontological argument for God's existence is about being, and it uses the aspect of being to be the main crux of its argument. And I have found, I've been surprised how much that word has been coming up and out through my studies, and how even my stepdad is, I got one of the, I would call him a spiritual, he's an influence in my life, definitely a spiritual influence in my life. But he's encouraged me when he knows that I'm struggling with things to focus on being. And it blows my mind that in my spiritual practices, as I meditate, as I journal, as I pray, as I work on this book, that's what this has been about this whole time, is
Hmm.
that we are more being than we realize. This brings up for me even like the nature versus nurture debate. I remember in developmental psychology, it kind of coming up, and I was really confused because for me, there was this third aspect of the person that was there being left out of the debate of the being themselves. I didn't have the language. I didn't understand then what I was sensing and what I was disagreeing with. But where you were ending with, it was just trudging up all this for me too.
Hmm.
Being, life is fundamentally about being, not about doing. And I wish it didn't take me 40 years to figure that out.
I think that's a good place to wrap for today. There's so much to think about this stuff, and you've done so much with this book on so many different avenues, and I think there's still a lot of trade space to go, um, into other topics. But once again, people should be able to get access to this book. And when it does come out and you send me a link, I'll drop that in the show notes, of course.
Oh, thank you.
And I think the next time that we meet, I want to start having conversations with you about us. Tell my story,
Hey,
you tell your story. I think that'll be an interesting place to go next.
yeah, and I think I'll be ready for it. I'll have some tissues close by because yeah,
Well, I look forward to that very much. So thank you so much for your time tonight.
the
This has been,
tissues. You look forward to the tissues. I just want to
to
make
the
sure everyone
discussion.
notes that.
No, I look
Yeah,
forward to the
thank you.
discussion. All right. We'll talk again
Yeah,
soon.
yeah, thank you, Brandon. This was a blast.
Well, as with every time I interview Paul, the discussion goes a slightly different direction than I anticipated. And that's part of what makes it enjoyable for me. Paul has done a ton of work across a hugely diverse set of topics, even though they're all tied to this idea of a mystical awakening of the Son of Man. I think the book will be worth your time, and trust me, for all the discussions we've had here, we've barely scratched the surface of what he's written. The next couple times that Paul and I talk, I think we'll be interviewing each other about our own histories, what got each of us to the place we are at today. And next time, I'll be telling my story to Paul. So if you're interested in hearing it, please subscribe so that you're notified when I post that next episode. Thanks for spending some time with me today. I appreciate it deeply, and I want to honor that time with the best content I can produce. So we'll talk again soon. Be blessed.